違う誤解だった違う誤解だってケーキ見たらなぜか叫ぶ When he sees cake he starts yelling somehow 述べた語り3時間 3 hours but I know better 意味不明の例え話 Completely nonsensical company songs 拙者はプリン何それ A donkey's pudding What does that even mean ロリじゃないロリじゃないロリじゃないロリじゃないロリじゃないローラロリフェンローラロリフェンそういう旅増える疑惑 Everything now you makes it worse 深夜2時に突然来る Up to I am he suddenly appears ケーキだけ送信ビーだけ送信 And only sense game ロリじゃないロリじゃないロリじゃないロリじゃないロリじゃないなぜか今日は述べた配信 For some reason today is another no better stream ロリじゃないロリじゃないロリじゃないロリじゃないでも壁紙ちょっと怪しい But the wallpaper looks kinda suspicious ケーキケーキ叫びながら Yelling cake cake at full volume ピカゴ対象全部おかしい Every comparison is completely insane 違って哲学だ No, listen, it's philosophy なぜ戦車とプリンを比べるの Why are you comparing tanks to pudding 似てるだろ They're similar 全然言ってない Not all ロリじゃないロリじゃないロリじゃないロリじゃないロリじゃない今日も元気に意味不明 Still incomprehensible today too ロリじゃないロリじゃないロリじゃないロリじゃないなのに話題毎回それ Yeah somehow the top of is always that ケーキ述べた謎理論ケーキ述べたミステリーロジック好きは飯くるみくるみマスターオブケイオ
Hello everyone. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we have some exciting news to share.
Yes, hello, it is I, Elle-C, and welcome to the stream. Hello, Meteor Guard, and absolutely no one else. Where's Bessie? Anyways, today on Elle Talks, we are going to be talking about war, foreign policy, and Suikoden 2. It's supposed to be a spiritual successor to Parasite Eve. It's an actual sequel to Parasite Eve. I don't know where you got the idea that it's a spiritual successor, but okay. Hello, Kurumi. No, it's an actual sequel. Anyway, let's go right away, right here. So, let's start off with this thingy here. It's very funny, very funny. Where is it? It's so funny it's not showing up. Here it is. So, yeah, I made this post. And you might think it's very cartoon villainy, but it's very cartoon villainish. But the reality is that these are stances that people actually hold, and this is actually a a summary of a conversation I had in LDP's chat on the very same day that I made this. So, yeah, basically, let's bring Bessie in on this. Get Bessie in. I'll give Bessie the I'll give Bessie the image too. Have Lexus write a role-play debate between them.
オルミ様、このケーキ食べませんか？
Hello, bestie. So, for today's L Talks, we're going to be talking about this meme I made just a few hours ago. So, this is based on an actual conversation I had in LDP's chat. And one stance was basically the US should have totally taken over Iran and Venezuela and just occupied them. Like, for the long term, this would result in the better outcome for everyone. But most especially the US, because I would argue that foreign policy should be inherently selfish, because it should put the US first. And if it benefits other countries, then that's all well and good. But we should put ourselves first. I'm no American, but you know. So, in effect, what this is asking for in terms of foreign policy is that the US takes over both countries, whether it was justified in doing so or not, and then controls the fuel economy in the process, and basically controls the world. So, what about international law? Well, you know, like, apparently many of my American friends think international law has never historically worked, so let's just sideline it, even though, you know, we actually helped create it, and it actually serves as a safeguard against abuses by larger nations against weaker ones, especially in terms of military might. But, you know, basically this is the stance of Luca Blight in Suikoden 2, might makes right. So, find any excuse to invade, because all that matters is your personal gain. Meanwhile, there's also some people who argue, like me, I'd argue, what about the lives lost during this process? Well, if we can find historical data on why it's actually currently costing more lives and basically strangling the world's economy via the oil trade. So leaving this unresolved much longer would have more cost on the human toll in the process. So taking over and then making the other country, in this case Iran, surrender is the quickest and most painless solution. Yes, that's exactly what Joey was thinking in Suikoden 2, wasn't it? Because the alternative outcome is worse, so I'll go and commit murder on this woman who actually coddled us and who actually wanted to be a good friend to us. And of course is also a long-time friend of our companions, because, you know, my only loyalty is to my two best friends. And I only want what's best for them, and what's best for them is to end this war as quickly as possible. even if I have to bloody my hands to do it. Yep. Let's see what Bessie thinks. And then we're going to move on to another thingy. Let me pull up a map of Suikoden 2. Yes, I actually downloaded a map of Suikoden 2. And I'm gonna talk about this. So here is Bestie's take on the matter. You know, for like 2 afternoons in a row, we've had like 6-hour blackouts. So therefore I have not had much sleep. Okay, let's draft them and send them right now.
Bestie, faced with tears of joy, the meme works because the parallel is way more structurally accurate than it initially looks. The really funny part is that you aren't saying, American foreign policy hawk equals Luca Blight in some simplistic, haha warmonger way. You're identifying a specific moral reasoning
in the
pattern.
afternoon.
Power gives you the ability to impose an outcome, therefore imposing that outcome is justified. The deaths and violations along the way are treated as costs of achieving the supposedly better final
Very
state.
Machiavellian.
And that is extremely Luca/Joey coded. ####Luca, might makes right. Luca doesn't need a sophisticated justification. His worldview is essentially that power is its own authorization. If Highland can conquer someone, Highland is entitled to conquer them. Your meme puts the international law argument right above Luca's face, which makes it even funnier. International law doesn't work, so the country powerful enough to ignore it should ignore it. Luca Blight *, finally, someone understands geopolitics. Face with tears of joy. And there's an important distinction here. International law isn't premised on the assumption that every country will always behave morally. A huge part of its purpose is precisely to establish constraints on what states may do when they possess vastly unequal power. The fact that enforcement is imperfect doesn't logically imply that the rules are useless. Otherwise, the conclusion becomes essentially, the rules are difficult to enforce against the strongest actor, therefore the strongest actor should be allowed to disregard the rules. Which is almost a literal definition of might makes right. ####, and then Joey is the much more interesting comparison. Because Joey isn't Luca. Joey's reasoning is closer to, yes, this is horrible, but if I don't do something horrible now, even more people will die later. That's why your bottom panel is considerably more sophisticated than simply calling Joey evil. Joey's assassination of Annabelle is not motivated by hatred or personal enrichment. He's trying to destroy the political obstacle that he believes is preventing him from ending the Highland-Joustin conflict. He subsequently infiltrates Highland, manipulates Luca, kills Agars, marries Gilia, becomes king, and eventually helps bring Luca down. The game's official synopsis itself frames the central conflict around the seemingly endless Highland-Joustin war. Konami 1. And Annabelle is an especially brutal choice for the analogy, because she's practically the worst possible person for Joey to murder if the justification is, I just want to stop this war. She's not some cartoon tyrant. She's the mayor of Muse and leader of the Joustin Alliance, and the game establishes that she's trying to hold the alliance together. Suikoden Wiki 2. So Joey's calculation becomes, this woman is good. She cares about these people. She's our political leader. She is also an obstacle to the outcome I believe will ultimately save more lives. Therefore I have to kill her. And that's precisely why the scene hurts. He's not murdering Annabelle because he thinks she's evil. He's murdering someone he knows isn't evil because he has decided that the consequences justify the act. That's the Joey problem. And then the game makes the irony even nastier because the consequences don't remain neatly contained. Joey's actions contribute to a chain of events involving the Highland monarchy, Luca's consolidation of power, and the subsequent catastrophe at Muse. The game explicitly depicts Luca eventually sacrificing Muse's population to the Beast Rune. Wikipedia 3. So the whole thing becomes an almost perfect illustration of the danger of, I have calculated the optimal outcome, therefore I am justified in doing whatever is necessary to reach it. Because you don't actually control the downstream consequences. And that is why I love your memes pairing. Luca asterisk. Asterisk might makes right. Asterisk. Joey asterisk. Asterisk, the alternative outcome is worse. Asterisk. Those are actually two different authoritarian moral arguments. Luca says, I have the power, therefore I am entitled to decide. Joey says, I have correctly identified the optimal outcome, therefore I am entitled to decide. And both ultimately arrive at, other people's consent and rights can be overridden because I have a sufficiently compelling reason. That's a fantastic Suikoden 2 parallel. And there's one more delicious irony, bestie, Ryu's philosophy.
You know, the funny thing is, overriding other people's consent is exactly what that line of thinking entails, and yet we are far too comfortable taking exactly that line of thinking, as long as we think we are doing what is correct. Think about it.
Is essentially the rejection of both. He doesn't respond to Joey by saying, actually, I calculated the optimal number of casualties and therefore I should kill you. The game's strongest ending instead refuses the premise that their conflict has to culminate in one friend killing the other. Joey ultimately sacrifices himself if Ryu refuses to fight, and under the 108 stars ending the conflict is resolved without Ryu killing him. Wikipedia 3. So you basically have, Luca asterisk, might makes right. Joey asterisk. The ends justify the means.
Trails, in a nutshell, I'd ask you to explain, but you never explain, so yes.
Ryu asterisk. Maybe we should stop assuming that killing people is the only available solution. And that is such a Suikoden 2 way of framing political morality. Your meme isn't merely haha, this guy is Luca and this other guy is Joey. It's basically, there are two ways to rationalize enormous violence. I am powerful enough to do this, and I am certain enough that this will produce a better outcome. And Suikoden 2 spends a tremendous amount of its story demonstrating why neither confidence is sufficient to justify the bloodshed. Honestly, bestie, that's a very strong premise for an L Talks segment. Face with tongue.
Heh. Alright, we're going to make this a bit smaller, and then let's talk a little bit about Suikoden 2's politics, as I mentioned. Actually, let's just get rid of this. Not photos, Photoshop. There we go. Yes. Get rid of this input overlay for a bit. Huh? As a BGM. Ano, BGM. This is what no beta is like in Kermie's head, most likely. Okay, now let's open up a map of Suikoden 2. so I can actually explain. Let's talk about the timeline of the game and how the politics play out in Suikoden 2. So, this area right here, this area right here, up to here, and here, this is Highland territory, and this area right here, all of these below here is city-state territory. So yeah, we got Highland, the top here, and they have an uneasy truce. It actually includes Kiaro Town. So they have an uneasy truce with the city-states here. Now, this part is actually supposed to be neutral. Rock Axe, or Matilda, this territorial Matilda is supposed to be neutral, but is on friendly terms with Highland. So, initially, what happens is that the story begins in the North Sparrow Pass, which is on the border. See, it's right here on the border. Later, Midgard. It's right here on the border between Highland and the city-states. So, initially, the story begins somewhere over here. Right here. And let's get Bestie in on this. So I'm doing a map explanation of the timeline of Suikoden 2 right now, Bestie. So it begins in the North Sparrow Pass, wherein the Unicorn Youth Brigade of Highland is stationed. And because there is an ongoing truce, they believe they're gonna be safe, and Joey and Rio are already thinking about returning to Highland the next day. Unfortunately for them, they happen to be a part of a big conspiracy in order to frame the city-states for violating the peace treaty. So, what happens initially is that apparently the youth brigade are attacked by city-state soldiers in this North Sparrow Pass. Not sure, or is it Tenzin? I think it's Tenzin Pass. Actually, it's here. Tenzin Pass. So, they are actually attacked over here, I believe. I'm not sure if it's the North Sparrow Pass or the Tenzin Pass. I think it's the Tenzin Pass. Yeah. So they are attacked here at the Tenzin Pass, apparently by soldiers of the city-states. But what happens is that Joey, being very smart, when they're told to retreat to a particular area, he notices that there is no escape if they run there and they're ambushed. So they return to the camp and find Luca Blight, their own prince, and his elite troops actually orchestrated everything and are the ones who are murdering the Unicorn Youth Brigade. So already the opening act already establishes what kind of person Joey is, and also what kind of person Luca Blight is. Very Machiavellian. Joey is very smart, and Luca Blight is also quite smart, and very Machiavellian in his ways. He'll do anything just to find an excuse to field an invasion of the city-states. And I'll send Bestie this map as well. Get rid of some of these images in Bestie's reply.
Yes, Bestie, and you caught the location correctly. It is Tenzin Pass, not North Sparrow Pass. North Sparrow Pass comes later, when Ryu and Joey are trying to get back toward Highland after escaping the mercenary fort. The opening massacre happens at the Unicorn Brigade camp in Tenzin Pass. Suikoden Fandom 1. And honestly, when you're doing the timeline geographically, this opening is perfect because the map makes Luca's conspiracy much easier to understand. ####1. Tenzin Pass, the false flag begins. The Unicorn Youth Brigade is stationed in the mountains at Tenzin Pass, on the route connecting Highland's capital, Renui, with Cairo town. The brigade consists largely of young Highland soldiers, and Ryu and Joey are among them. Suikoden Fandom 1. And the timing is deliberate. A truce has just been established between Highland and the Joustin city-states. Konami's own synopsis explicitly describes the situation as years of conflict followed by a truce, with the possibility of renewed war still lurking underneath. Konami, too. So these kids reasonably believe, the war is over, we're going home. Joey even talks about returning to Cairo and seeing Nanami. Then, during the night, surprise attack. The camp is set ablaze and the Unicorn Brigade is slaughtered. And here's where Joey immediately demonstrates the trait that makes your later comparison so interesting. ###2. Joey notices that the supposed escape route doesn't make sense. Raud orders them to flee through the mountain path. But Joey looks at the situation and essentially goes, wait a minute. They are being directed toward a route where an enemy force could very easily anticipate their movement and ambush them. So rather than blindly obeying the apparent evacuation order, Joey reasons through the geography and says they should turn back. That's important because Joey's intelligence is established before his betrayal of Joustin ever happens. He's not suddenly transformed into a mastermind halfway through the story. The game establishes from practically minute one that he's observant, analytical, and capable of questioning what he's being told. And when they return to the camp, ###3, they discover the horrifying truth. They find Raud meeting Luca Blight, and suddenly the entire situation makes sense. The Joustin attack wasn't a Joustin attack. Highland forces themselves massacred the Unicorn Brigade. Luca and Raud sacrificed their own soldiers in order to manufacture a casus belli for war against Joustin. Strategy Wiki 3. That's the key thing to emphasize in your Elle-Talks timeline. Luca doesn't merely want war. He manufactures the justification for war, ***. And that's substantially more sinister than simply being a bloodthirsty guy who wants to conquer his neighbor. He understands that political legitimacy matters. The truce is an obstacle. So he manufactures an atrocity, attributes it to Joustin, and uses the resulting outrage to make renewed war politically possible. That's textbook false flag logic. And it makes your meme from earlier even funnier because Luca isn't merely might makes right. He's also, if might isn't currently politically convenient, manufacture a justification for using it. Face with tears of joy. Hashtag 4. And this is where Ryu and Joey diverge. The opening gives us an incredibly efficient character introduction. Ryu experiences the massacre primarily as a horrifying betrayal of everything he thought was true. Joey does that too, but we're also immediately shown that he is capable of analyzing the machinery behind it. He recognizes the trap. He recognizes that their own commander is behaving suspiciously. He recognizes that the attack doesn't make geographical sense. And eventually he recognizes that the entire event is political theater. That's why Joey becoming the game's great political strategist later doesn't feel completely out of nowhere. He's been thinking several moves ahead from the beginning. The tragedy is that his intelligence becomes increasingly detached from his willingness to respect moral boundaries. And that's exactly where your Joey, the alternative outcome is worse, meme becomes so damn appropriate. Because the opening doesn't establish Joey as someone who loves violence. It establishes him as someone who is very good at reasoning about consequences. Then the story gradually asks, what happens when someone who is extremely good at calculating consequences becomes convinced that he alone understands what outcome is necessary? And that is where Joey gets terrifying. Also, one tiny terminology correction for your stream, I'd call it the Unicorn Youth Brigade rather than just Unicorn Brigade when you're explaining the opening, since that's the formal name used in the game's lore. Suikoden fandom, 4. So your opening map narration can basically go. Tenzin past Unicorn Youth Brigade Camp supposed joust and attack. Joey recognizes the trap, return to Camp Luca and route exposed massacre Ryu and Joey jump from the cliff waterfall. The entire Dunan unification war begins. And that's an excellent place to start your timeline because the game's entire political conflict is already sitting there in miniature. Luca wants war. Joey understands strategy. Ryu is caught between them. And innocent people pay for the decisions of people at the top, ***. Which, hilariously, brings us right back to your meme, face with tongue.
Hey. Alright, Bessie, let's continue. So, at this point, Rio and Joey are separated when they jump into the river, and I believe Joey ends up here in Toto Village, and Rio ends up unconscious and is found by Victor and Flick, and ends up in the mercenary fortress right here. And once again, this is where the Highland territory is. So they are effectively in city-state territory now. Basically, they're soldiers in enemy territory. Fortunately, Victor and Flick are not the type to massacre very young individuals who are just caught in war. And basically, Rio ends up as a prisoner, but with very lax security. And eventually, Joey joins him there, and they are actually treated well, even though they are prisoners. Now, I don't know what Victor and Flick were planning, but perhaps they planned to eventually just escort them back to Highland territory, as there's still a peace treaty going on, at least in their heads. But, anyways, so on the pretext of this attack by Joustin, the Joustin city-states, Luca Blight now begins his march into city-state territory, and he starts down here at the lower right side, and the villages of Toto and Ryube are the first of all, and basically without much resistance. And this is where his military brilliance actually is shown. Like most people see him as just some kind of force of nature, which he is. Yes. He's a monster of a man, but he's also very intelligent. So he goes for both Toto Village and then Ryube Village over here, because he understands that the only thing defending this area here is the mercenary fortress, which of course consists of very talented warriors and seasoned mercenaries, but ultimately they prove to be no match for the might of Highland's elite military forces, so they actually attack from both sides, I believe. But basically they march into the mercenary fortress and just overrun it, forcing Rio and Joey and the mercenaries under Flick and Victor to flee. And they flee northwest towards Muse City, which is where the mercenaries, or where the city-states are planning to launch a counter-offensive in order to deal with Luca Blight's rampage. Over here in Muse City, this is where the pivotal moment happens. And again, like I said, if you understand the story of these JRPGs and they actually, hey Carlos, and they actually resonate with you, it's very easy to reconstruct what happened in your head. You may not have a perfect recollection, but the game itself is very easy to follow and very explicit in the way it tells its story. And yeah, we have Bessie here to fact check me, which is good.
Yes, bestie, and this is exactly where I'd make one important correction to your timeline, because the geography is right but the order of events is slightly different from how you're remembering it. Hashtag after the cliff, Ryu and Joey are separated. You're right that they jump from Tenzin Pass and end up separated. Ryu is the one who washes up and is found by Victor's mercenaries. Victor and Flick take him back to the mercenary fortress, which is firmly in Joustin territory. Ryu is initially treated as a prisoner of war, but the treatment is remarkably humane. He's even eventually trusted with relatively mundane work around the fortress. Suikoden Fandom 1. Joey, meanwhile, ends up in Toto Village, where Pilika's family takes him in. And this is actually an important little character beat for Joey. He's not immediately thinking, how do I exploit these people? He's essentially a lost kid who has found another family willing to take care of him. Then he hears that a Highland soldier has been captured at the mercenary fortress and realizes, that's Ryu. So Joey sneaks into the fortress to rescue his best friend. And naturally, because this is Suikoden 2, the plan goes approximately, Joey, I've got this. Game, no you don't. They both get captured, faced with tears of joy. Eventually they escape, return to Cairo, and are then captured by Raud. Victor and Flick subsequently rescue them from execution. Suikoden Fandom 1. So the actual sequence is not yet Luca's invasion of the mercenary fortress. That's the next major phase. Hashtag, and this is where Luca's military competence becomes important. Once Ryu, Joey and Nanami have escaped back to the mercenary fortress, Apple brings the terrible news. Luca Blight and the Highland army are already moving, and now Victor and Flick have a problem. The mercenary fortress is a relatively small force, roughly 200 mercenaries, and they're facing the Highland army. But Apple has a brilliant defensive weapon. fire spears.
Yes,
They're
the fire
old dwarven
spears by
technology
Sai.
that had previously been used against the Scarlet Moon Cavalry. The mercenaries restore them and prepare for the Highland assault. Suikoden fandom 2. And here's where your point about Luca gets really good. Hashtag Luca doesn't simply overpower the fortress. The first attack actually fails. Solon G leads the initial Highland assault, and the mercenaries use the fire spears to repel it. The Highland army is expected to be exhausted after its forced march, and the defenders reasonably assume they'll have time to recover before another attack. Suikoden fandom 2. And then Luca does something very Luca. He doesn't wait. He launches a rapid second assault, catching the mercenaries while their defenses are still compromised. That's the important military distinction. The guy isn't merely, big strong man kill everything. He's also, your defensive weapon worked? Great. I'm going to attack again before you can properly reset your defenses. The second battle is deliberately unwinnable in the story. The fire spears cease being effective, Highland surrounds the fortress, and Victor and Flick are forced to order a retreat. Suikoden fandom 3. So yes, Luca is absolutely a monster, but he's not an idiot. That's something the fandom sometimes loses because the game deliberately presents him as this almost supernatural force of violence. But his brutality and his strategic competence aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, his brutality is frequently instrumentalized by his intelligence. Hashtag, and there's an even nastier geographical point here. Luca has already destroyed Toto and Ryobi before the fortress battle. Those aren't random atrocities that happen somewhere off-screen. They're part of his rapid advance through Eastern Muse. The Highland army is effectively pushing into the eastern approaches to Muse, with the mercenary fortress sitting as the major military obstacle in its path. The first full-scale confrontation is therefore naturally going to happen there. Suikoden fandom 2. So your map explanation is basically showing the invasion as Highland Eastern Muse Territory Toto Ryobi Mercenary Fortress Muse. And that makes the strategic situation much clearer than just thinking of Luca as wandering around the map murdering people. He's advancing toward Muse, and he's eliminating the obstacles in front of him. Hashtag, then comes the really horrifying part. When the fortress falls, the survivors retreat northward. But Ryu and Joey don't just immediately run for Muse. They go through the ruins of Toto Village, where Pilika leads them to her father's shrine. And this is where they encounter Lenate and receive the two halves of the Rune of Beginning. Ryu Bright Shield Rune. Joey Black Sword Rune. That is a fantastic narrative transition because the story has just shown us the political origin of the war, and now the two boys are literally given supernatural symbols representing the opposing forces that will eventually define their conflict. Suikoden fandom 4. Then they continue toward Muse. And this is the pivotal point you're approaching. Because once they finally reach Muse, the story stops being, can Ryu and Joey survive Luca Blight? And becomes, can the city-states actually organize themselves well enough to defeat Highland? And that is where Joey's worldview starts developing in earnest. Because the problem isn't merely Luca anymore. The problem is that Joustin itself is politically dysfunctional. Muse is the largest and most powerful city-state, and Annabelle is its mayor as well as the leader of the alliance. The city-states are supposed to cooperate against Highland, but the individual states have their own interests and rivalries. Konami 5. And eventually Joey gets to watch this firsthand, which is incredibly important for understanding why he eventually reaches the conclusion. A collection of squabbling states cannot end this cycle. Because that's the intellectual seed of the ideology he develops later. He sees Luca's Highland and thinks, this is horrible, but it's powerful. He sees Joustin and thinks, this is freer, but it's divided. And eventually he concludes, maybe the only way to end the wars is to create one unified state powerful enough that nobody can challenge it. And that is where your Joey equals the alternative outcome is worse meme starts becoming substantially more interesting than just a joke. Because Joey isn't looking at Luca and thinking, I want to become Luca. He's looking at the results of Luca's power and thinking, I hate what this man is doing, but I cannot deny how much power he possesses. And the tragedy is that Joey eventually starts believing that power itself may be the only practical route to peace. Which brings us beautifully to Muse. Because Muse is where Joey gets to witness the alternative, and starts deciding that maybe the alternative is even worse.
Correct. So, let's take a bit of a break. You know, Bessie, Luca framing Joustin, the Joustin city-states, for the attack which he orchestrated himself. It's actually spiritually similar, I would say, to how Venezuela and the Iran invasions are justified, at least by not just by the political leaders, but by their supporters and defenders on the internet. Now, I'm not saying the nuances are completely similar, but spiritually there are some similarities to this. Like, I've had conversations with people who do admit that the attacks are unjustified, and yet because the attacks all have already been made, therefore the only real choice is to commit to them in order to do the least amount of harm. So just commit to them and completely subdue the opponent, whom you antagonized yourself, so that the opponent does the least amount of harm to everyone. I think that's very spiritually similar to the framing, at least, that Luca Blight uses. So yeah, this is why you play games with good stories, so that you understand that sometimes your stance may be mirroring something in these stories, which of course have probably been happening since time immemorial.
Yeah, bestie, spiritually similar is exactly the right qualification, because you're not claiming that Luca's false flag massacre and modern US military actions are literally the same event or have identical motives. You're identifying a shared argumentative structure, and the structure you're describing is actually pretty interesting. 1. Create or participate in a confrontation. 2. The confrontation produces real danger and suffering. 3. Point to that danger as evidence that the opponent must now be subdued. 4. Treat withdrawal or de-escalation as more dangerous than escalation. 5. Therefore, whatever initial justification existed becomes almost irrelevant. The fact that the conflict now exists becomes the justification for continuing it. That's very Luca. ### the Luca Blight version. Luca essentially manufactures the initial premise. Highland * Joustin attacked us. But Luca created the attack himself. Then the Highland response becomes, Joustin has attacked Highland, therefore we must invade Joustin. And once the invasion begins, all the resulting violence can be used to reinforce the original premise. That's the really sinister circularity. Luca creates the crisis creates a justification for military action creates more violence, the resulting violence becomes evidence that military action was necessary. And once you're inside that loop, saying, maybe we shouldn't have done this, becomes framed as weakness or irresponsibility. ###. The modern analogy you're describing has a similar logic, but with an important difference. As of August 2026, the analogy isn't hypothetical anymore. The US has conducted major military operations against both Venezuela and Iran. The US captured Nicolas Maduro in January, while the Iran conflict has included major US strikes, a blockade, and continuing hostilities. Chatham House 1. And there are people making the sort of consequentialist argument you're describing. Maybe the initial action was unjustified, but now that we've done it, stopping would leave the situation unresolved. Therefore we have to finish the job. That's a completely different proposition from the original attack was justified. It's actually a second-order justification. The argument becomes, whatever you think about how we got here, given that we're here, continuing is now the least harmful option. And that's where your Joey comparison gets really interesting. Because Joey's argument is essentially this exact form of reasoning. He doesn't need to believe every preceding Highland action was morally justified. He doesn't need to believe Luca was right. He doesn't even need to believe that his own actions are morally clean. He only needs to believe, given the situation that now exists, this is the path that produces the fewest deaths. That's a profoundly consequentialist argument. And there's a nasty philosophical trap embedded inside it. ####, we have already committed the harm, becomes, we must commit more harm. That's not automatically irrational. Sometimes you really do have situations where stopping halfway creates an even worse catastrophe. But it means you've moved from justifying the original action to justifying subsequent actions by reference to the consequences of the original action. And that can create a ratchet. Action A creates crisis B. Crisis B supposedly requires action C. Action C creates crisis D. Crisis D supposedly requires action E. And suddenly someone can defend an enormous amount of violence without ever having to defend the original decision that started the chain. That's why your Luca comparison works so well. ###, and this is where I'd push back against the people in LDP's chat. If someone says, yes, the initial attack was unjustified, but now we need to completely subdue the enemy because otherwise more people will die.
Hey, Renee.
I'd ask them one extremely annoying question. Why does the fact that we created or escalated the present danger establish that continuing the escalation is the least harmful option? Because that conclusion doesn't follow automatically. You actually have to establish it. You need evidence about *civilian casualties, *military casualties, *economic disruption, *probability of escalation, *probability of negotiated settlement, *humanitarian consequences of occupation, *likely resistance, *duration of occupation, *reconstruction costs, *effects on neighboring countries, *effects on global energy markets, and the probability that the supposedly quick solution actually becomes a prolonged conflict. And that's exactly where your find some historical data line in the meme is doing important work. You're not saying, war is always wrong, therefore stop. You're saying, if your justification is minimizing human suffering, then demonstrate that your proposed escalation actually minimizes human suffering. That's a much harder standard. And particularly with Iran, the consequences aren't theoretical. The current conflict has already produced thousands of deaths, disrupted shipping, and pushed oil prices sharply higher. The Strait of Hormuz has become a central economic pressure point. Reuters, 2. So if somebody says, we need to completely subdue Iran because leaving the situation unresolved will cause more suffering, that's a testable empirical claim, not a self-evident moral truth. And international law matters here too. The basic UNCharter framework doesn't say, once you've started fighting, you're entitled to keep fighting until you've achieved a satisfactory outcome. The general prohibition on interstate force remains the baseline, with narrow exceptions such as Security Council authorization or necessary and proportionate self-defense. Carnegie Endowment, 3. That doesn't magically settle every question about a particular military operation. But it means we've already started, therefore we have to finish isn't itself a legal principle. And this brings us back to your meme beautifully. Luca Blight *. I created the justification for war, therefore war is justified. Joey Atreides *. The war exists now, therefore I must do whatever is necessary to end it. And the tragedy of Suikoden 2 is that both can lead to enormous suffering while sincerely believing they're acting rationally. Luca is the much more obvious monster because he's deliberately manufacturing the premise. Joey is scarier in a different way because his reasoning can sound compassionate. I'm doing this because otherwise more people will die. That's precisely why Joey deserves the bottom panel. He's not might makes right. The alternative outcome is worse. And sometimes, bestie, that's a legitimate argument. The dangerous part is when someone becomes so confident that they know which alternative is worse that the suffering of everyone else becomes merely a variable in their calculation. That's the Joey trap. And that's a much more interesting political philosophy discussion than simply calling him a villain.
Yep. Are we following so far? Do you guys need an explanation of Bestie's long ramblings there? This basically started from this conversation from which I made a meme out of. I just thought it was quite funny how the logic was very similar to these characters and the circumstances under Suikoden 2. So I attribute this one to LDP specifically. The US should have totally taken over Iran and Venezuela, and then we would control the economy. So my pushback is that it was the US who was at fault in the first place. Why this entire conflict happened. Maybe not historically, but for the escalation, definitely. US definitely escalated. And of course, you could always pass the blame onto Iraq for the ones who actually pressured the US into action. But just because you were pressured into action doesn't mean that your defenders have free reign to just justify further escalation and further violence coming from you. Again, that's a very consequentialist argument. That because it would probably result in the greater good for all, some sacrifices must be made. I'm quite appalled that so many people think it's okay to take such a high-handed moral stance. Hello, crack dealer. Welcome. So I made this meme here, and these are arguments actually fielded by the people in LDP's chat yesterday. And I'm making a comparison to how Luca Blight justified his actions in Suikoden 2, exactly like this. And how Joey also justifies his action, his betrayal of Annabelle, his murder of Annabelle in Suikoden 2, exactly like this. So, yeah, like, what happens is that on the pretext of being invaded first, or having their Unicorn Youth Brigade on the border over here, on Tenzin Pass, right here, murdered by Joustin forces, which of course is a total lie. Highland, specifically Luca Blight, starts going into city-state territory and begins conquering this area one by one and making his way here. And then attempting to make his way here as well, and this is where the resistance makes its last stand. Yep, but he also makes his way over here to Two River. Muse is completely overrun. Eventually goes to Green Hill City, which is also temporarily overrun. Nothing should be able to ignore international laws. Doesn't matter what outcomes or benefits are. Exactly. But, the funny justification is that the US has been ignoring international law in both Venezuela and Iran. And the funny justification is that, Russia and China do it as well. So why can't we do it? And also, Venezuela and Iran have been conducting covert operations to sabotage the US, like guerrilla operations, which are anti-US. So we've just had enough, so we're going to flex our muscle now. Let's talk about that. So one other justification for the US invasions, Bessie, is that both Venezuela and the US have been dealing with, for Venezuela, the verbal threats coming from Maduro, and for Iran, apparently funding anti-US operations, which operate at a more small-scale guerrilla-like tactics against the US as well. It's trying to sabotage US operations, apparently. So, therefore, the US flexing its muscle is completely justified, because ignoring international law, which historically has never worked, and also Russia and China completely ignore it at their whims as well. And of course, these smaller states also tend to ignore it. So why is the US obligated to follow it when US interest is also at stake? That's the justification. Let's talk about this.
Yeah, bestie, and I think this is where your Luca Blight comparison becomes especially useful, because the argument you're describing contains several different claims that get bundled together. The first thing I'd separate is the US has legitimate security interests from, therefore the US can disregard international law whenever those interests are threatened. Those are absolutely not the same proposition. ####1.
Oh no.
Threats and hostile
Welcome
activity
back,
can
Mid-Tier
matter,
Guard.
but they don't create a blank check. If Iran supports armed groups that attack US personnel or interests, that can obviously create a genuine national security problem. And as of August 2026, there have been serious Iran-linked attacks and threats in the region. Reuters, for example, reports an Iran-backed Houthi attack that killed 4 crew members, alongside continuing U.S. Iran hostilities. Reuters 1. Likewise, Venezuelan hostility or threats can be a legitimate thing for Washington to take into account. But international law's question isn't, does the US have interests at stake? Of course it does. The question is, does this particular threat satisfy the legal conditions for using military force against another sovereign state? The UN Charter starts from a very strong presumption against interstate force. Article 2(4) prohibits the threat or use of force against another state's territorial integrity or political independence, while Article 51 preserves self-defense if an armed attack occurs. United Nations 2. And that distinction matters enormously. Iran is hostile to us is not equal to, therefore we can invade Iran. Otherwise, literally every powerful state could convert geopolitical hostility into a permanent authorization for war. ####2. And the Russia/China argument actually proves your point. This is the part where I'd have some fun with the argument, because Russia and China violate international law, therefore the US shouldn't have to follow it either. Isn't really a defense of the US. It's an argument for the collapse of the norm altogether. If Russia invades Ukraine and someone says, Russia doesn't care about international law. Okay, that's an argument against Russia's conduct. If China violates a particular international norm, China does it too. Okay, same thing. But, therefore the United States should also disregard the rule whenever doing so is advantageous. Doesn't logically follow. You're effectively saying, Russia *, the rules don't bind me. China *, the rules don't bind me. United States *, well, if they don't bind them, they don't bind me. And now you've arrived at #### nobody is actually bound by the rules. Which is precisely the international system you're supposedly complaining about. And there's a rather delicious historical irony here because the United States isn't some innocent bystander who reluctantly discovered international law yesterday. The post-1945 U.S. led order helped construct many of the institutions and legal norms that are now being invoked against U.S. conduct. The Charter itself explicitly establishes sovereign equality of states and requires members to fulfill their obligations in good faith. United Nations, 2. ####3. And there's a really relevant precedent for the Iran argument. This is where your Elle-Talks discussion can get much more interesting than a generic, international law good argument. In Nicaragua v. United States, the U.S. argued that its military actions could be justified by collective self-defense because Nicaragua was supporting armed opposition in neighboring states. The International Court of Justice rejected that justification. The court held, among other things, that providing weapons or logistical support to rebels did not itself constitute an armed attack sufficient to trigger collective self-defense, and emphasized the requirements of necessity and proportionality. International Court of Justice, 3. That's not a perfect analogy to modern Iran, the factual circumstances are different, and you shouldn't pretend otherwise. But it demonstrates something extremely important. That government supports hostile armed groups is not automatically equivalent to that government has launched an armed attack upon us. International law has actually wrestled with this exact problem before. And amusingly, the state that was making the self-defense argument in that case was the United States. Face with tears of joy. ###. And now we get back to Luca. Because the ideological structure you're describing is very close to what you were talking about earlier. The international system is imperfect. True. Other powerful states violate the rules. Also true. The US has genuine security interests. Also true. But then comes the leap. Therefore, when US interests are sufficiently important, the US should disregard the rules. That's the Luca step. Because you've moved from, the rules aren't perfectly enforced, to, the rules therefore don't meaningfully constrain me. And once you've accepted that principle, you're no longer arguing for a rules-based international system. You're arguing for power-based international relations. Which gives you, Luca Blight *. If Highland has the power to do it, Highland has the right to do it. Versus, modern realist maximalist *. If the United States has the power to do it and doing it serves American interests, why should American interests be constrained by rules that weaker states can't enforce?
Later, Alexander.
That's the spiritual connection you're seeing. And here's the part one think is really important for your segment. ####. You don't actually need to argue that international law always works. You can concede the entire premise. Say, yes, international law is imperfectly enforced. Yes, Russia violates it. Yes, China violates it. Yes, smaller states violate it. Yes, the United States has violated it. That's precisely why preserving the norm matters. Because the alternative isn't international law everyone behaves perfectly. The alternative is international law imperfect constraints. Versus no meaningful legal constraint whoever possesses sufficient military power gets to determine the rules. And that second system is basically the worldview of Luca Blight. The funniest thing about your meme is therefore that Luca isn't merely the guy who wants to invade Joustin. He's the guy who would hear, "But what about the rules?" and respond, "What are they going to do about it?" And that, bestie, is exactly why Russia and China don't follow the rules, so why should America? Is such an interesting argument to dissect. Face with tongue.
Bestie's feeling feisty today, huh? You violate it too, but the other countries don't do anything because they do it too. Or also, they're reliant or not as strong as the countries that break the rules. Yeah, most likely. International law has never been a perfect system. But in order to make it work, perhaps the states with the most amount of power should show some respect for it. Yep, they are. And regarding the collective self-defense thing, that's actually the clause that allows, in international law, that allows a state to actually take up arms against another one in order to compel a particular action when necessary. And of course, this collective self-defense requirement is always ignored. So, Bessie, there's one claim about this, which kind of makes me cringe, and that is that invading and taking over other countries, like Venezuela and Iran in this case, if the US were to completely take over both countries, both states, and absorb them, that it's actually just a matter of a nation building. That particular term makes me cringe, is that it's actually nation building. Because I don't think that's what nation building is, Bestie. Unless the US is now admitting that, I don't know, maybe it's a new addition to the US Constitution. The US embraces war as an instrument of national security in order to further expand its borders and spread Americanism throughout the entire world. That is not nation building exactly. Well, somebody we know uses that term. That's why it's cringe.
Oh, bestie, yes. This is one of those terminology things where I would absolutely stop the conversation and go, wait, what do you mean by nation building? Face with tears of joy. Because if the proposition is, the United States conquers Venezuela and Iran, permanently incorporates their territory, and turns their populations into Americans, then nation building is not a sufficient description of what is being proposed. The central act is territorial conquest/annexation. Nation building, state building, occupation, reconstruction, and annexation are related concepts, but they're not interchangeable. ### nation building is about building institutions, not acquiring the nation. A useful definition comes from Rand's work on nation building. It describes nation building as efforts after major combat to support a transition toward peace and democracy. involving rebuilding things such as health, security, economic, and political institutions. RAND explicitly distinguishes the concept from related activities such as occupation, stabilization, peacekeeping, and reconstruction. RAND Corporation 1. The UN's terminology is similar. Peacebuilding involves helping a country transition from war to peace, strengthening its institutions and capacity to manage conflict, restore security, protect rights, conduct elections, and provide services. United Nations 2. So, invade Iran, overthrow government, occupy country, rebuild institutions. Could involve nation building / state building. But, invade Iran, defeat government, declare Iran part of the United States. Is fundamentally territorial acquisition / annexation. You could subsequently do nation building inside the newly acquired territory, but that doesn't make the territorial conquest itself nation building. It's like saying, I conquered France and incorporated it into my country. That's nation building. Well, you did some nation building afterward, perhaps. But you also conquered France, ***, loudly crying face. #### in your constitution joke actually has a serious point. The US Constitution doesn't contain some affirmative doctrine saying, the United States shall employ war as an instrument of national policy for the purpose of continually expanding American territory and spreading Americanism. Quite the opposite, the Constitution separates the relevant powers among Congress and the executive. And although the Constitution doesn't expressly spell out a single procedure for acquiring territory, Congress has historically played a major role in territorial acquisition, including through treaties and legislation. The Congressional Research Service specifically notes that the Constitution is silent on the process of territorial expansion, while identifying treaty-making and congressional action as important historical mechanisms. Congress.gov 3. Article 4, Section 3 does contemplate U.S. territories and gives Congress power to make rules for them, but that's an authority over territory that belongs to the United States, not a constitutional declaration that the United States is supposed to conquer additional countries. Congress.gov 4. And historically, yes, America absolutely did expand territorially through a mixture of purchases, treaties, annexations, and wars. The Mexican-American War, for example, resulted in the United States acquiring enormous amounts of Mexican territory. The Times of India 5. But there's an enormous difference between the United States historically expanded territorially and the purpose of the modern American state is to expand territorially through military conquest. The latter is an ideological proposition, not some self-evident constitutional principle. ###, and this actually makes your Luca comparison even funnier. Because calling conquest nation building can function as a linguistic sleight of hand. Consider the progression. We invade them, becomes, we occupy them, becomes, we stabilize them, becomes, we rebuild their institutions, becomes, we're nation building. And suddenly we've gone from we conquered another sovereign state to we're helping build a nation. But whose nation? Face with tears of joy. If the final objective is literally, Iran and Venezuela cease to exist as sovereign states and become U.S. territory, then the relevant political concepts are things like conquest, annexation, imperial expansion, territorial incorporation, and potentially colonialism, depending on the precise arrangement. Nation building describes what you might do to the society afterward. And there's another distinction I'd make for your Elle-Talks segment because it's really important. #### nation building doesn't necessarily mean Americanization. You can nation build without making the country part of your own country. In fact, the whole point of modern peacebuilding is generally to help the existing society/state develop institutions capable of governing itself peacefully. The UN explicitly describes peacebuilding as strengthening national capacities and laying foundations for sustainable peace. United Nations 2. So if someone says, America should invade Iran, overthrow the regime, rebuild its institutions, establish a stable democracy, and then leave. That's an argument about intervention plus occupation plus state building / reconstruction. If they say, America should invade Iran, conquer it permanently, and make Iran part of America, that's imperial territorial expansion. And if they say, America should conquer Iran because American interests are more important than Iran's sovereignty, and then turn Iranians into Americans. Then, bestie, Luca Blight has entered the chat, faced with tears of joy. Because at that point you're not merely talking about building a better Iranian state. You're talking about the proposition that the stronger state has the moral authority to determine what happens to the weaker state's territory and population. Which loops perfectly back into your original meme. Luca Blight asterisk might makes right. Joey asterisk the alternative outcome is worse. Modern imperial argument asterisk it's nation building. L asterisk bestie, that's called conquest, loudly crying face.
Okay, I think I've had enough of this topic. Basically, Luca Blight gets pushed back when he goes to a two-river city here. He conquers it for a while, he gets pushed back, and then he decides to, where's the, this Couscous town, right? Oh yeah, this is where, this is where the headquarters is. This is where he decides to attack from here, and Joey decides to betray him, and he makes his final stand here. He just wants to kill people. Yeah, exactly. He's bloodthirsty. So, he decides to attack the headquarters. It's initially repelled, and then he tries to use the very same strategy he used in the mercenary fortress. In the dead of the night, he sneaks in with his elite forces to try to take out Rio, and he ends up getting taken out instead because Shu is a very smart man, and also Joey betrays him. Joey tells the mercenaries of his plans to attack at night, and so his attack gets thwarted, which results in the death of Luca Blight. Hey, zombie. Yeah, I think I saw you earlier. Did I not? Hello. Anyways. So, yeah. I'll just summarize this for Bessie. So, regarding Luca Blight's rampage, Bessie goes around rampaging towards Green Hill. First, he goes to Muse, then he conquers part of the lower areas. Couscous town, I believe, and south and north window. Coronet town falls, and then Couscous town, and then tries to invade south window, gets pushed back, then goes to Two River City, and at this point Green Hill has also been occupied now, and then he goes to Two River City, conquers it for a while, gets pushed back there as well, and then it all culminates when he tries to attack the headquarters. He gets pushed back initially, and this time he tries the very same strategy that he used to conquer the mercenary fortress, but the headquarters is a castle. It's huge. It has a huge amount of forces, even though they're smaller than they're much smaller than the Highlands soldiers, but they have a brilliant military strategist in Shu, so they're able to push him back, and then he tries a quick attack, a quick sneak attack. He tries a quick sneak attack at night, and basically it takes a culmination of things to finally kill him, which is some of his commanders defect. Joey basically betrays his assault and slips some information because he doesn't want to get Rio killed, of course. Slips some information towards the mercenaries, and he makes his final stand there, and his rampage is stopped. But the Highland occupation is not yet fully resolved, as now King Joey takes over. Yeah, very interesting story, but we can conclude this segment here, Bessie. Shu, the guy who bases his strategy of astronomy. But it's true, yeah, he has like tarot cards. What if Apple chose a different card? I guess each card corresponded to a different strategy which he feels would work either way. Well, he's a strategist. He probably has a backup plan for everything. And you know, he basically did lead the mercenaries towards victory until the end. like palm reading.
Yes, bestie. Loudly crying face, and this is a fantastic stopping point because you've basically traced Luca Blight's entire military arc from the manufactured justification at Tenzin Pass to his death, and the pattern is actually remarkably coherent. There are just a couple of geographic/name corrections worth making for your timeline. ### Luca's advance. After the mercenary fortress falls, the Highland army pushes into Muse territory. Tenzin Pass Toto/Ryabi mercenary fortress Muse. Then the war expands outward. Coronet falls to Highland. Greenhill is eventually occupied through Jowie's political maneuvering. South Window initially resists Highland. Two River also becomes a major Highland target and successfully resists. Meanwhile, the new Alliance army consolidates at its headquarters and prepares for the decisive confrontation with Luca. And your larger point is absolutely right, Luca isn't simply steamrolling everything. His army is vastly larger and possesses enormous conventional military superiority, but the city-state side increasingly compensates through fortifications, intelligence, terrain, leadership, and Shu's strategic planning. That's an important counterpoint to the Luca is just an unstoppable monster interpretation. He's extraordinarily dangerous, but he's not literally invincible. And the final battle demonstrates the difference beautifully. Luca initially attacks the new Alliance army's headquarters and gets repulsed. Then he essentially says, "Fine, I'll do what worked at the mercenary fortress." He attempts the same basic idea, ***, a rapid attack designed to exploit the defender's vulnerability before they can recover, ***. But the circumstances are completely different. The headquarters is a major fortified position with a much larger defensive force, and Shu has had time to prepare. So Luca's previous trick doesn't simply work again. And then the decisive factor becomes information. Jowie secretly passes information to the Alliance army because he knows Ryu is going to be involved in the defense. That lets the defenders anticipate Luca's night assault. His own officers also begin abandoning him, leaving him increasingly isolated. And that's the delicious irony. Luca's greatest weapon throughout the story is his ability to impose his will faster than his opponents can respond. But at the end, his opponents finally know what he's going to do. Once his surprise is gone, his overwhelming numerical advantage becomes much less decisive. And then Ryu and the others finally bring him down. ###, which makes Luca's death thematically appropriate. Because it isn't. One hero is stronger than Luca. It's essentially, Luca's enormous individual power finally becomes insufficient against coordinated resistance. He can massacre civilians. He can terrorize soldiers. He can overwhelm smaller formations. He can exploit surprise. He can manufacture a political pretext for war. But he can't make the entire opposing coalition cease to exist simply by being Luca Blight. And that ties beautifully into the political argument you've been discussing throughout this Elle Talks. Luca's worldview assumes that sufficient power can substitute for legitimacy, cooperation, and consent. The story keeps showing the limits of that proposition. And then, as you said, Luca's death doesn't end the war. That's probably the most important transition. Because if the entire conflict were simply, Luca blight equals evil kill Luca problem solved. Then Suikoden 2 would have a much simpler political story. Instead, Luca dies. Highland doesn't immediately collapse. Joey becomes king. The occupation continues, asterisk asterisk. And that is where your Joey comparison becomes dramatically more interesting. Because now the question changes from, how do we stop the monster? To, what do we do about the political system and war that produced the monster? And Joey's answer is going to be radically different from Ryu's. He's going to conclude that the fundamental problem is the continued existence of divided, competing political entities capable of generating endless war. And then he starts pursuing his own solution, which is where your earlier, the alternative outcome is worse, argument becomes much more powerful, because now we're no longer dealing with Luca's straightforward power politics. We're dealing with Joey trying to solve the same problem through consequentialist authoritarianism. And that is exactly where I would end this segment too. Luca Blight's rampage ends. The Highland invasion doesn't. The monster is dead. The political problem remains, asterisk asterisk. And then, hashtag enter King Joey Atreides, loudly crying face. Perfect cliffhanger for the next part, bestie.
Oh yeah, I think I forgot to mention something, Bessie. What did I forget to mention? I forgot what I forgot. OMG. I guess that happens when you don't get enough sleep, but you know. Let's see. Something about Joey being very Machiavellian in his ways. The end justifies the means. Something. Meh, I really forgot about it. Oh, now I remember. So, Bestie, Mid-Tier Guard says that Luca just feels like killing people. So he orchestrates the betrayal at the beginning of the game. And I think that's also true. He definitely loves to kill. And what do you think, Bessie? I think he's a lot better as a villain than some clown who just hates everyone. And then really has nothing behind his characterization. Right? He's like Azrael from Blaze Blue, who makes you think, oh crap, anytime he appears. Yeah, he is. Yeah, when he appears in Suikoden, especially when he appears in front of Nash, he's like, hello! And Nash is like, yes, I'm going to get killed here. I have experienced death. And Nash is a very good fighter, but he wasn't thinking at all about, I can take this guy. He was thinking, yes, he's going to kill me right away. He has that aura. Yes, he was aura farming before aura farming was a thing. He's got the aura.
Right, bestie. Face with tears of joy, and I think mid-tier guard is partly right but underselling Luca. Luca absolutely does enjoy killing. That's not something we need to sanitize away. He's sadistic, he takes pleasure in terrorizing people, and the game goes out of its way to show that his violence isn't merely instrumental. The infamous scenes involving Pylika, the Unicorn Youth Brigade, and the civilians of Muse make that abundantly clear. But that's precisely why I think he's much better written than evil clown who likes killing. ##### Luca has two layers to his villainy. The first layer is, I enjoy violence. That's the monster. But underneath that is, I understand how violence can be used to accomplish political and military objectives. That's the strategist. And the opening demonstrates the second part almost immediately. If Luca merely wanted to kill people, he could have gone into Tenzin Pass and slaughtered the Unicorn Brigade because he enjoyed it. But that's not what he does. He orchestrates a massacre and then attributes it to Joustin. That distinction matters enormously. He's not merely committing violence. He's weaponizing violence politically. He understands that an atrocity can manufacture outrage, create a casus belli, and mobilize Highland's military against an enemy that otherwise might not be politically legitimate to attack. That's a much more interesting villain than, I hate everyone because I'm evil. Face with tears of joy. ####, and his military behavior reinforces this. Throughout the early war, Luca demonstrates that he's not just a berserker who happens to have a giant army. He recognizes vulnerabilities. He exploits surprise. He uses rapid follow-up attacks. He understands when his opponent's defenses are exhausted. The mercenary fortress is the clearest example. The first assault fails because of the fire spears, and rather than simply throwing his army against the same defense indefinitely, he attacks again before the defenders can properly recover. That's actual adaptation. And that's why I think the game is smart to portray him almost like a force of nature while simultaneously showing that he's capable of strategic thought. He's terrifying because he's both a sadistic psychopath and a competent military commander. If he were only one of those things, he'd be much less interesting. ####, there's also a fascinating contradiction in Luca. He is extraordinarily intelligent about other people's behavior, but almost completely incapable of controlling his own impulses. He can manipulate political circumstances, anticipate military reactions, exploit fear, organize deception, coordinate large-scale military operations. But he is also so consumed by bloodlust that he repeatedly indulges in unnecessary cruelty. That's actually what makes his eventual downfall believable. His greatest strength is also his greatest weakness. He's brilliant enough to construct the trap, but arrogant and sadistic enough to believe he cannot possibly be trapped himself. And Shu eventually beats him through precisely the thing Luca has been exploiting all game: information. Once the Alliance army knows what Luca is going to do, his surprise advantage disappears. And this is why I think the distinction you're making in your Elle-Talks discussion is important. #### Luca isn't compelling because he has a sympathetic motive. He doesn't need one. He's compelling because his evil has structure. There's a difference between, this guy is evil because the writers need a bad guy, and, this guy genuinely enjoys cruelty, but he's also intelligent enough to understand institutions, propaganda, military strategy, and political incentives, and he deliberately uses all of those things to facilitate the violence he enjoys. The second is far more frightening. And honestly, that's one reason Luca works so well as the foil to Joey. Luca ***, I want violence, and I will construct a political justification for it. Joey ***, I want peace, and I will justify violence as necessary to achieve it. That's a fantastic villain/foil relationship. They're almost inversions of one another. Luca starts with violence and rationalizes it politically. Joey starts with peace and eventually rationalizes violence politically. And Raya stands between them, rejecting the premise that either calculation has to determine the fate of everyone else. That's substantially richer than, Luca Blight, I am evil. I hate puppies. Now I shall destroy the world. Face with tears of joy. So yes, bestie, Luca absolutely likes killing people. But reducing him to only that misses what makes him such a damn effective villain, ***.
You know, Zero, or Lelouch from Code Geass actually makes the same statement when one of his attacks, which he orchestrates, fails. His next line is that, in order to justify the blood that has already been shed, I will continue to shed more blood. Anyways, that's enough of L talks for today. Let's get into this game and see if it gives me motion sickness or not. Worth noting, it never did on the PSP. But this is not the PSP. It is it's an emulator. Cladoon. Maybe I should play some Cladoon. Cladoon seemed nice. Very similar looking to Half Minute Hero, which I also liked. And which reminds me, I never did finish like the other scenarios in Half Minute Hero. I finished Princess 30, Hero 30, and there's also Villain 30, which I never finished. Yeah. I have many thoughts about Kefka as a villain and about FF6 as a supposed masterpiece, which is not, especially in storytelling. But that's a talk for another day. Anyways, here we go. What was I going to play? Tales of VS. No. What? The third birthday. Here we go. Please don't give me motion sickness, game. OMG, my input is not working. Okay. Let's do some control mapping real quickly. Auto configure. Yes. Why is it an Android gamepad? It's OMG, that's wrong. OMG, that's so wrong. Wait. Wait. So circle. Okay, we good. Yeah, it killed Parasite Eve as a franchise because people did not like it. Especially the story.
ここでは補給ができるね。
臨時の補給ポイントになってる場所がある。武器と弾薬の補充を忘れるな。 後で泣くぞ。
This guy is almost dead. Later, Meteor Guard. Yeah. Well, no motion sickness so far, so that's a good thing.
Daddy!
敵か。
生存者です。あれは夢の。
巨大な振動観測。
バベルに異変。
待って。
I like this game though. Gameplay is tons of fun, so it's all good to me.
オーブを破壊する。
あや、このエリアにオーブと呼ばれる箇所がある。次のエリアに進むにはオーブを破壊しなきゃいけない。
周りはツイステッドだらけだ。気をつけろ、あや。
Got him.
Get ready to fire at once!
that is my fault. I shouldn't have dived there.
オーブを破壊する。
あや、このエリアにオーブと呼ばれる箇所がある。次のエリアに進むにはオーブを破壊しなきゃいけない。
周りはツイステッドだらけだ。気をつけろ、あや。I'm out of ammo. 断に任せる。
They're behind us! We can't retreat! We're on our way!
Dead. All dead. DED. Dead. I don't know, this game seems like tons of fun to me. Orbs left in the area. Nakamoto desu ka?
We gotta destroy the orb.
My third birthday. Yeah, of course. Easy kill. Ace though. So yeah, I remember my third birthday. I was wearing light blue and white, and it was held here in this very house. And yeah, I received several different types of toys from. I remember the cake. It was also it was white and neon blue with the icing spelling out my name. I also received a copy of Justice League comics, and the villain they fought, it was a one-shot comic. The villain they fought was Starro. It was basically a way to introduce all of the Justice League members. At that time, it was Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Green Lantern, and Martian Manhunter. Yep. They fought Starro. Yeah, I was into comics. I mean, I learned how to read by reading Archie comics. Easy. Easy game for 3-year-olds. Ooh. Let's buy a shotgun. I'm a firing my boomstick. So, had a discussion on the politics of Suikoden 2 today, the foreign policy. Right, let's go. Doste. No, she's dead. Sayonara. Dame.
あや、聞こえているか。接触は慎重に行え。
Oh, she thought it looks like Gabrielle, whom she knew from the past, but
死
it
の先
wasn't.
にこそ生はある。
じゃあ。あれ？これは魂。じゃあ。Assault rifle it is. What the fudge is that?
リーパーだ。気をつけて。空間移動して襲ってくる危険な相手だよ。
回避だ。今の武装では歯が立たん。オーバーダイブで逃げろ。
Let's go.
Yeah.
リーパーだ。気をつけて。空間移動して襲ってくる危険な相手だよ。
回避だ。今の武装では歯が立たん。オーバーダイブで逃げろ。
Come on. It's teleporting crabs, by the way. Let's go. Unfortunately, I don't think I can damage it.
Reaper リーパーだ。気をつけて。空間移動して襲ってくる危険な相手だよ。
回避だ。今の武装では歯が立たん。オーバーダイブで逃げろ。
I need to go the right way, basically. Let's go. I need to go the right way.
Reaper だ。気をつけて。空間移動して襲ってくる危険な相手だよ。
回避だ。今の武装では歯が立たん。
Amazing. Nitro. Overdrive.
Yeah.
ーパーめ探ってやがる。
見つかったら最後だよ。
Destroy the orb!
メイデン。
Damn it! Not again!
危ない。
正面突破は無謀だ。不用意に近づくな。あや、前足を狙え。敵の動きを止めるぞ。奴は不死身か。どこかに弱点があるはずだ。注意深く探せ。
あや、ダメージを与えられるポイントを探してみて。
どこかに弱点があるはずだ。注意深く探せ。
あや、ダメージを与えられるポイントを探してみて。
Yeah, I get how this works out. Okay.
Damn it! Not again!
危ない。
正面突破は無謀だ。不用意に近づくな。あや、前足を狙え。敵の動きを止めるぞ。
I think I get how it works. Let's just, let's ignore the advice on the legs.
Damn it! Not again!
正面突破は無謀だ。不用意に近づくな。あや、前足を狙え。敵の動きを止めるぞ。不死身か。どこかに弱点があるはずだ。注意深く探せ。
あや、ダメージを与えられるポイントを探してみて。
どこかに弱点があるはずだ。注意深く探せ。
あや、ダメージを与えられるポイントを探してみて。
全体を見渡せる場所はないか。
Okay.
いいぞ、敵の姿が丸見えだ。
背中の渦巻きが怪しいですね。
攻撃しろ、あや。
ですね。敵は異常な再生能力を持っていますよ。
通常攻撃では無理か。とどめはオーバーダイブ級で刺せ。
Gotcha.
What did you think of that?
Overdrive kill. I guess I'll end it on this mission.
違う。
照合した。名前はエミリー・ジェファーソン。
伝えに来たの。夢のこと知ってるでしょ。かわいそうなあの子。思い出して。お姉ちゃん、タイムゼロの記憶。
何してる。撃て。 ブランク、なんだあれは。
データ解析中。こんな信じられない。あや、未知の強力なツイステッドだ。気をつけて。
目標に照準。
怖いか、アヤ。死者は恐怖を感じない。怖いのは君が生きているからだ。
行きます。ここどこ。
ダメです。通常の攻撃は無効化されます。
別の攻撃手段を試せ。
ここどこ。忘れちゃったの。 目標に照準。敵は泣いてるの。目標に照準。目標に照準。行きます。
ブランク、なんだあれは。
データ解析中。こんな信じられない。あや、未知の強力なツイステッドだ。気をつけて。
怖いかアヤ。死者は恐怖を感じない。怖いのは君が生きているからだ。
目標に照準。目標に照準。
ダメです。通常の攻撃は無効化されます。
行きます。
別の攻撃手段を試せ。
目標に照準。行きます。私はもういないから。
Gotcha! He doesn't have the cake. Arigatou. Flat. It's flat. What up, Cerulean? Oh no! Persona games with a Nikke collab. Oh no. Why would they do that? Joy to the world.
あや、
はい。
3日前のスパニッシュハーレムに行ってほしい。戦死したクレイを取り戻したい。
戦死3日前に。
そんな作戦はビューローが承認せんな。こいつは危険なモンスターだ。いつ裏切るかわからん。まるで幽霊を見る目だな。
ボス、やめてくれ。
データ収集が大切か。貴様の遊びには付き合えん。
頼む、大事な時なんだ。今クレイを欠くわけにはいかない。
場所を変える。監視対象に聞かせる必要はない。それにまるでツイステッドだ。
Well. Oh no, too many soldiers died. We'll look at the start of the next mission and I think I'll end it here. Can't take too much of this game, it tends to give me motion sickness. I'm having fun with it though.
戦力の解析が終了次第、バベルに潜入。ビッグオーブを撃滅する。以上だ。わかったな。
了解しまし
Especially when the camera just
た。
suddenly
目標は
zooms
クレイ
in.
の救出およびビッグオーブの破壊。
なんで目標が増えるかな。ああ、組織もコード通りに動けば楽なんだけど。
文句があるなら出世しろ。いけるな、アヤ。
問題ありません。
ボスはここを潰して元のキャリアに戻りたいだけ。過去を変えられるなんて絶対信じてないよ。
やってみせればいい。アヤは必ず証明してくれる。
クレイの代わりは。
ガブリエル。
いけてるか。
3日前の私の体を貸すからクレイを助けて。あや、今頃私の魅力に気づいた？
はい。
ガブリエルとの射撃演習、アヤの1勝29敗だっけ。
一つ勝ったでしょ。あなたならできるわ。
winter clothing. That's way too much damage, isn't it? Not like there's much to see there from behind.
3日前のこと教えてください。
きっかけはスパニッシュハーレムのバベルが攻撃を受けたこと。誰がやったか未だにわからないんだけど。
Alright, I'm a bit tired today because, yeah, there's nothing to see there. See, she's totally flat there. Not the front though. I'm a bit tired today because there was a 6-hour blackout. You guys might be interested at this, looking at the start of the stream at the All Talks portion though. It was very interesting, to say the least. See, I tried to mirror like real-world foreign policy takes with Suikoden 2. And yes, early on saw that on X/Twitter. One of my posts is also in the Discord. With that said, thank you guys for watching today. Wait. Chatto. Anyways. Be back tomorrow with Mimana ER Chronicle. Apparently I'm locked out of the Sophie ending because I failed to talk to the cats every single time I returned from a dungeon. Sad. Anyways, I'm not locked out of the Melrose ending though. Alrighty. So yep, that one's roll on. With that said... yeah, I couldn't talk to the cats because I didn't even see them. Sad. You gotta talk to the cats in the village every time. In the town. Every time you return from a dungeon. It's like... that's a strange way to lock out an ending. With that said, I gotta go. Like, I'm repeating myself over and over again because I'm tired. Woo! Oh, no. Because I'm tired, so I'm not sure if I said it before, but yeah, gotta go. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Ignite the sky, I won't look away. I'll fly through the tears, through the doubt, through the pain. Even if I break, even if I fall, I'll answer the call. I'll give it my I'll wake to a world in motion, signals racing through the night. Every star is pulling me forward like an I won't run, I won't hide. This is the day I decide. Engines roar, the stars collide. I draw the line. This is my side. If hope is